And we welcome you to episode 30 of the second season of the Exit Philosophy podcast. He is Rich Griffin. I'm Scott MacArthur. We are coming to you over the lunch hour as we record on Monday, July the 29th. So, timestamps can always be important, but they're particularly important for this episode because the trade deadline is a little more than a full day away tomorrow afternoon. And with that in mind, Griff and I are going to do an extra podcast this week. It won't be usual length, like an hour or anything like that, but we will sit down the night of Tuesday, July the 30th, and break down what happened in its totality around baseball. As we sit here right now, the Toronto Blue Jays have made some moves. You know that Danny Jansen is with the Boston Red Sox. Yimi Garcia traded to the Seattle Mariners, and the Chicago Cubs had an epiphany that I can't imagine many other organizations in the league would have had. So thank goodness for them. And Nate Pearson is now on the north side of Chicago. So the Jays have made 3 trades as we sit here right now. We anticipate an almost certain Yusei Kikuchi deal at some point within the next 24 plus hours. Justin Turner, Kevin Kiermaier, there could be others. Griff,
Scotty, when
who knows?
when I was growing up in the game, there was a rule called the Cub rule, and if you had too many Chicago Cubs on your roster, you were never going to the postseason. You were never going to win. So if you had ex Cubs, you had more than anybody else. You were done. And with Nate Pearson, it seems almost like a reverse with the Blue Jay factor. They got Julian Merriweather, they got Mark Leiter Jr., they took Stroh, gone now, of course. And now they've got Nate Pearson. So my guess is that even though they're on the fringe of wild card, they just did themselves in by getting a third reliever from the Blue Jays into their bullpen. So they're done. Your
Yeah,
Cubbies are done.
my reaction to the Pearson acquisition from Nate's perspective. So I said, let me get this straight. Nate Pearson is pitching today for a team with bad ownership, content to reap revenues off of recent stadium renovations, for an uninspired front office that had a totally underwhelming offseason in one of the top 5 population spots in North America. What's changed for him?
He'll be right at home. He'll be
What's
right.
changed?
Before we get into this week's show, I'd just like to thank Dave Perkins for filling in for you for a week. It was fun talking to my ex-boss and my colleague at the Toronto Star, and he did a great job. But that brings me to the question of how was your week? I think it started in Newfoundland. Had
So
you ever been to Newfoundland?
I had never been. So I first want to say I listened to the Perk episode, and I really enjoyed it. The old stories, your guys going on about Jim Leland and, just the different experiences that you had. Lots and lots of fun. And I grew up reading Dave, and I hate to age you out, Griff. I
Yeah,
then grew
please.
up. I then grew up reading you.
Uh,
Damn, eh?
it cuts to the quick.
It really sucks that a guy in his mid 40s is telling you that he grew up reading you. But that's how it goes. That's how it goes. So I went with my cousin, and I think I've shared certainly on my end the passing of my friend Mina at the end of April. My cousin Joanna, she and I are 17 months apart. As I like to remind her, she is older. But we have been close our whole lives because we share grandparents on my dad's side and on her mom's side. So the MacArthur set of grandparents, and they used to host family dinners every Sunday. And so we grew up together, um, typically seeing each other each and every weekend or most weekends of the year. So we've always been close. And sadly, my cousin Jo lost her husband almost a year and a half ago now. And so we talked about trying to create things to look forward to, And she's been out east to see me in Nova Scotia last summer, and she said, "Well, do you want to go to Newfoundland?" And I said, "You're damn right I do." So we did a week, 3 days in Newfoundland, 4 days she was back here with me, and I took her to some places that she didn't see when she was out a year ago. And it was really cool because I got to reconnect with my best friend from Algonquin College's radio broadcasting program, which I attended in the early 2000s. He's a radio star in St. John's, does a morning show, and hadn't seen him in person in 20 years. We went whale watching and actually saw whales. It's not promised. You know, you sign up for one of these boat tours and they'll tell you, we'll do our best, but like we can't make the whales come over to us. But we saw a mother and her calf. I didn't know that a baby whale was called a calf, but they put on a show for a good 45 minutes. We were out in Bay Bulls, Newfoundland. You know, most places it ends in Bay. There it's Bay Bulls. And I'm like, well, where's Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen? Okay, my bad jokes are over and done with.
You did send me some couple of clips of the whales cavorting in the ocean, and it's nice to see that at least one can perform with a calf. Probably like Bo's still out with his calf, so and that's just in response to your bad jokes.
Yeah, so. I don't know what was worse, that one or mine. Maybe a tie. The other part of that, and I'll put a plug out, it's O'Brien's whale watching tours in Bay Bulls, Newfoundland. So you're about a half hour in the car southeast of St. John's.
I'm sure the traffic's not too bad, though.
It's not too bad. It's not too bad. And the drive is quite stunning, as you would imagine. So we hung out with the whales for like 45 minutes, and then they take us over to this island, which is not an island that you can get off the boat and just walk up onto. Like, we're talking rock face and the flat part at the top. And this is where all the puffins are.
Yeah, and they're like strange little birds.
500,000 puffins on this island. There are some other birds as well. One of them are kittiwaks, and they inhabit this island. And so when you look, and I tried to take some photos, but you have to zoom in on an iPhone photo to do it justice. But like these birds, you don't see much of the island because it is completely covered in birds. And of course, there are birds also flying around. And I'm not talking like a couple of seagulls, like you take a walk down to Lake Ontario, you're at Lakeside Park in Oakville Griff, and you're like, oh, there's a couple of shithawks. I'm talking about like a Hitchcock movie.
Yeah, that was what I was imagining as you were describing it.
Except it's daytime. So,
and there's no phone booths.
We're on the boat and approaching this, and I'm looking at it. We're trying to take photos. I say to my cousin, I said, Joe, like, I think we got to keep our mouths closed unless we're talking to each other, because the percentage likelihood of catching some droppings with all these birds flying over our head is really high. And if the host MC with the microphone didn't make that announcement 5 seconds later, he did. But it was amazing.
Yeah, it sounded, and the clips that you sent were amazing. Did you end up screeching when you got back to dry land? Well, that was dry land, but when you got back to the rock?
We screeched. And it's funny because we walked into Christian's Pub, which is right on George Street, the famous George Street, or the infamous George Street, as the case may be. And we walked in. We were kind of ignorant. We said, hey, we'd like to get screeched in. Well, we didn't know you had to, like, sign up. And it's a whole production. So we signed up for 5 o'clock in the afternoon the next day. And a guy named Chef Lukey, who, if you watch it, Parts Unknown, was that Anthony Bourdain's show on CNN when he
Yeah,
traveled the
yeah,
world cooking, the
yeah.
culinary stuff. And
Every
so
Sunday night.
so Anthony Bourdain, may rest in peace, was screeched in at Christian's by Chef Lukey, and it is at the very end of the episode on Newfoundland. If you ever YouTube it, you can find it.
Excuse me, but Chef Lukey sounds like one of those Muppets characters.
Just, well, but we walk in. We were told to be there a half hour early because they lock the bar. This is a whole production. So if you're not there on time, you're not getting in until the whole show is over and you've missed your appointment. We walk in and he is writing out names of the people who'd signed up on these little diploma style pieces of paper to commemorate you getting screeched in. And once it all started, Griff, there might have been 15 of us all around the bar. And they put some bologna on this searing pan and fire goes up. So you each eat a slice of smoked or burnt or whatever bologna. And there's a whole deal that goes with that. He tells the whole story of it, blah, blah, blah. Then you kiss the cod. And they tell the story about the screech. Screech is really birthed out of Jamaican rum.
Well, I can
When the
relate to that.
when the first Anglo settlers arrived in Newfoundland, they struck out onto the ocean and with their fishing nets and whatever, and realized, oh my God, we got so much codfish here, we don't know what to do with it. So what happened was the Jamaicans came up, traders, and swapped rum for codfish. And so this relationship was born. So Screech is birthed out of Jamaican rum, and cod would go back Jamaica's way. And so you kiss the cod, representing what was traded away. And you then take a shot of Screech, which did not burn, which did not send me over a cliff. It was just, to me, regular dark rum. And it's a whole production. If you watch the end of Bourdain's episode in Newfoundland, it's heavily edited, but the show and a lot of what Chef Lukey talks about is included. It was amazing.
You know, it's funny before we get into the trade deadline discussion, but when I was growing up in Jamaica, the favorite dish was saltfish and ackee. And ackee was a vegetable, sort of colorful, grows on the trees there. But the saltfish, I always asked, what is the saltfish? Because it was mixed in with the rice and the ackee. And they said it was cod. And I went, well, where's the cod? There's no cod around here. And
Newfoundland,
damn,
baby.
yeah, lucky they didn't just have the rum. As an 8-year-old, I would have been in serious. Well, no, wait, I am in serious trouble. But it all comes together. I love it when it comes together.
Yeah.
Now,
I just want to say on Newfoundland, we had the 4 best weather days you could imagine. So,
it's called summer.
well, yeah, but it's late July. There are no promises yet, right? They consider August and September. They're about 6 to 8 weeks to be their best weather weeks and their 2 best weather months. But we hit the jackpot. It was sunny. It was pretty warm. I'm telling you, Griff, and maybe come and challenge me if I ever live there for a year and experience 10 months of fog and cold and get snowed in January. But I'm telling you, based on the 4 days I spent there, or 3.5 days I spent there, I'd move there. It's the people, the whole deal. And I'm only telling you for sake of brevity about 1/10 of it, right?
Yeah, I got to get there, and maybe you can go with me and show me all those things that you just talked about. I love.
Oh, we'll get you screeched in for sure.
The before we get to the trade deadline stuff, and it involves guys already gone, and you mentioned it: Danny Jansen, Nate Pearson, and Yimi Garcia. That leaves still to be decided before, and as you said, we're recording at lunchtime on Monday before the deadline. or before the doubleheader against the Orioles, there's still guys like Trevor Richards, Justin Turner, uh, Kevin Kiermaier, and Kikuchi to be dealt with, and maybe even Chad Green. There's a lot of chatter about Chad Green being a valuable piece for a contender because he's locked in for another season. But I'd like to just start with Danny Jansen. What were your impressions when he was dealt? I mean, where does that leave the Blue Jays catching for the final 2 months with just Alejandro Kirk? And we saw that Alejandro Kirk struggled when he had to catch every day when Jansen was hurt at the beginning of the season.
I thought it was interesting because on the broadcast yesterday, Sunday, I think it was Arden Zwelling talking about it. If not, it was Ben Schulman and Joe Siddall. But it was certainly during the game, so it was on the broadcast, talking about how Danny Jansen bridged a couple of different eras of Toronto Blue Jays teams, and the reference was sort of pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. And so I won't sit here and say that I knew or know Danny Jansen well, but he is a guy, Griff, who was there in 2019 when I was around the team. And I remember that he kind of, it's harder to, because I wasn't traveling. And people say, the nature of the business is changing so much, and budget cuts and a bunch of different things. This is not a reporter or a former reporter whining and griping and being the old man yelling at the clouds. Just please accept and trust me when I say there is so much value to traveling with a team, because you get so much more access to players before they go out for batting practice. They see you all the time. So I wasn't doing that in 2019. And Danny Jansen was a guy who became kind of a go-to for me because so much had changed around the Blue Jays in a couple of years since I'd last been around. And not being on the road, it was just harder to build consistent relationships. And Danny was just always a guy that I could ask a question to on the record or off the record, would always give me a couple of minutes. If he didn't have a couple of minutes at that time, would make sure to seek me out if we had set something up when he was coming back in after BP or what have you. So just a pure class act that way. I'll also say, Griff, I very rarely get, my mom, she'll sit down and watch games if my dad has them on, and my mom's a lifelong baseball fan, like my dad, loved the Yankees before the Blue Jays arrived in 1977, so like long history of loving baseball. But I very rarely get texts from her. And she texted me yesterday after the trade of Jansen to Boston. She's like, I loved him. He was my favorite player. This is such a sad day. And it got me to thinking, like, we knew this day was coming, or these days were coming, Griff. It just shouldn't be like this. This was not how it was supposed to go. And man, you lose a quality guy. You and I, for up until a couple of months ago, were talking about what the extension would look like because he's the heartbeat of the team.
Yeah. Yep. And to me, Danny Jansen, and I was thinking about it this morning and last night, is in my 30 years in the Blue Jays universe, writing for the Star, working for the team, and now with Griff's The Pitch and Exit Philosophy. In those 30 years, Danny Jansen is one of my 10 favorite people, not players, people. Mm-hmm. And it started in 2017 when I was being asked as a Star columnist to talk to the rookie seminar in the clubhouse, in the home clubhouse at Rogers Center in January. They would fly all these kids in and show them what it would be like to be in the big leagues. And there's this big, goofy looking catcher with glasses on and sitting by himself. And so I did a column on him because all the catchers, all the organization catchers were there. And I added them up in 2017. There was 19 or 20 catchers in the organization, and a lot of them have gone on to make it to the major leagues. But that was my first encounter with Danny Jansen. And then following his career as he made it to the major leagues, as he struggled with injuries, hamstrings, and being hit on the hand, that sort of thing. And just like you said, the cooperation, the genuine care about, hey, I said I would talk to you. Let's go over here. When there was a pitcher who wasn't available, who he had caught that day, he would spend as much time as you needed talking about what the guy had or didn't have in that performance. And it just went on. And when I worked for the team for 4 years, he was my go-to guy in terms of if somebody wasn't available, he would go and say, hey, let's go. We have responsibilities here in this clubhouse. And so he was a man's man as a player, even though he's only 29 years old. I think he might have just turned 30. No, he's 29. But I just didn't like the way that it ended in terms of him coming off the field and seeing on television the scroll on the bottom that he had been traded, and teammates looking at him and going, hey, you've been traded. And his wife was there with their young son and the baby. Mm-hmm. He had just had second child before the All-Star break. And they were in the wives' room, in the family room. And I'm sure that somebody said something to her then, which you'd like to hear it from your husband first. And as the player, you'd like to hear it from someone in the organization. And it's not that difficult to go down once you see that the rumors out there by Ken Rosenthal or Jeff Passan or whoever it was on Twitter, to go down to the clubhouse, even if it's not you as the GM, but one of your assistants, stick your head in the dugout and say, hey, Danny, come over here. Don't want you to be, bushwhacked by this, but we're working on this. It hasn't happened yet. It's likely going to happen, but I don't want you to see it on television. It would have been that simple. I mean, I've stuck my head in the dugout as a PR guy, and I got no reason for being there. Nobody's going to throw you out, but it's a responsible human thing to do. And it wasn't done. And I don't know all the details. I might have a few of the details wrong, but this is the story that came out from other players and from Danny talking about how he found out, and his wife down the hall in the tunnel not knowing anything. So I don't think that was handled well. I mean, I remember Ed Sprague when he was traded at the deadline, and this is before cell phones were prevalent, and it wasn't that easy. And the deadline was at midnight. The team was in Minneapolis, and Ed Sprague was with teammates in a sports bar, and the giant screen scrolled across the bottom. Ed Sprague has been traded to, I forget where, it might have been Seattle. And like, that's how he found out. And, that came together at the last minute. Okay. But this is a different era where it's very possible, where that it's going to come out ahead of the official announcement. I remember in 2019, my first year as PR in Kansas City, the trade deadline, and Joe Biagini comes off the field after the day game, and he goes to me, have I been traded? Some fan was yelling at me that I've been traded. And I said, well, I haven't heard about it. That must mean it's not happening. Like 3 minutes later, they go to him and say, Joe, you've been traded to the Astros. And he looks at me like, he didn't look at me mad, but like, how come this guy doesn't know anything? He's a PR guy.
Yeah.
And years later, I asked myself the same question. How come I don't know anything? Yeah, Danny Jansen deserved better than that, because he's one of the best human beings I've ever dealt with in that clubhouse.
Yeah. And I know that the reporting is out, Griff, that there had been conversations with players likely to be moved in the lead up to this week. Right. So Yusei Kikuchi or Danny Jansen been pulled aside. Just heads up. So I wonder if in Ross Atkins' mind, that covers it, and it could happen at any time, and somehow Rosenthal gets things before we even have a chance to get downstairs. Like, who
Yeah.
I'm not
Well,
disagreeing with
the
you.
deal was not official yet because even after the game, when John Schneider was in the interview room, he was asked, "Can you talk about it?" And he said, "No, I can't. It's not official." And so that lends to your point that the players knew about it, and that's why that would explain why Kikuchi coming off the field for his final time was so emotional. It wasn't like there's a chance that you'll be traded. It was the front office and Ross Atkins telling him 90% chance that you'll be traded. So as we record this, it hasn't happened yet, but we're expecting that will be one of the things that we talk about on uh, Tuesday night when we go live. What is it? We're
Definitely.
set 8 o'clock, 8
Yeah. So
o'clock Eastern time.
our plan is to do a trade deadline wrap up at 8 o'clock Eastern time on Tuesday night. So that's July the 30th. The deadline will have passed, and Griff and I will do a YouTube live at 8 o'clock. Now the Jays will be playing, but we can all do a couple of things at once, and we'll welcome your comments and hey, have the game on in the background and join us at youtube.com/@exitphilosophy. We will go live and invite your comments, and we'll generally treat it like a podcast episode.
Yeah.
We'll just, it's not going to be game specific, even though the Jays and Orioles will be playing at that time. If something big happens in the game, we might say, oh, did you see that? What'd you think of that? But it's going to be focused on the trade deadline, and we'll treat it like a regular podcast. It's just because it's live. We'll have the opportunity to interact with you. youtube.com/@exitphilosophy.
And so far, Scotty, as we speak, and the three trades that have been made, it's amazing that it's been one player from the Blue Jays going in the other direction. Danny Jansen, Nate Pearson to the Cubs, Yimi Garcia to the Mariners. And the return has been 7 minor league players, 3 for Jansen and 2 each for the other guys. And none of them are surefire major leaguers. In fact, you look at the MLB pipeline rankings, and it's like 23, 25, 29. It looks like Leo DiCaprio's dating app. But
not the 29.
Yeah, that's a little. She's aged herself out. but the one that's interesting so far among the 7 is Jonathan Clase, the center fielder, the outfielder that came over in the Yimi Garcia deal. 79 stolen bases in one season last year, and that's the sort of exit philosophy we've spoken about, the lack of exciting athletes that the Blue Jays major league team has been fielding, and how they miss the boat in what the fans are looking for, what Canadian sports fans, what GTA baseball fans are looking for, and that's to go to the ballpark and see exciting baseball, see offense. And the Jays were so hung up for a year and a half on run prevention. And Jonathan Clase, despite his speed, and he went right to Buffalo, so we'll see how he does there. He might be a September call-up just to see what he can do, and maybe at the very least he could pinch run every game and see what kind of a player he is. But that's the only guy. You've got 7 bodies, 7 minor league bodies so far, and I could see the same thing happening if by chance they are able to trade Trevor Richards, although he's struggled. Kikuchi will probably get at least one prospect who's more of a can't miss guy. But I did some number research, and from 2020 to 2023, so for 4 seasons, when the Blue Jays considered themselves contending team for the postseason, and they made the postseason 3 times during that stretch, they traded away 29 minor league prospects and got 7 in return. So when people criticize the farm system and say, well, they haven't produced, they got nobody. Well, that's true. They got nobody knocking on the door ready to play. But that's because when they were contenders and that window is clearly closed, that same window, it's not going to stay closed for long if they play their cards right. But we haven't seen that in a while, that they have to prove that they can do that. But when you trade away 29 and you only get 7 back, then your farm system is going to be shallower, weaker. Players get moved up. You sign fringy players just to fill spots on your minor league 25-man, 26-man rosters. So now they're trying to reload the farm system. And even though none of the 7 players that they got back so far, other than Class A, are surefire to even get a cup of coffee in the big leagues, they're reloading the farm system, and that's a start towards sort of what they need to do. But what they need to do is on a quicker timeline than most organizations who didn't put $400 million into renovating their major league stadium. I mean, they've got roster improvement in Buffalo, New Hampshire, and Vancouver, and roster the opposite of improvement at Rogers Center. So that's a problem.
Which you knew. I mean, that this is where they are. I mean, they've unfurled gems with deadline deals in the past, right? Teoscar Hernandez is the best example of that at the 2017 deadline for Francisco Liriano, the deal with Houston. And I mean, he was an all-star based on one half of baseball that he played a couple of years ago. But it's impossible for me to not consider a trade like Steve Pearce to Boston for Santiago Espinal a win for both teams.
Yeah.
I mean, Steve Pearce won the World Series MVP for the Red Sox in 2018, and Espinal came up through the system and played his fair share of games and had a good enough first half in 2022 that he went to Dodger Stadium as an all-star. So I know he's moved on, but so you have to hope that whether it's a Class A or a Coffee who they got in the Jansen deal with Boston, if one of these guys or two of these guys works out, and we can have a broad definition of what working out would mean. We're not necessarily talking about the next Juan Soto, but we're, a contributing piece to the big league team.
Like a Santiago Espinal, as you pointed out, is a guy
that worked
out. Yeah. And there are talented players, but none of them are rated. And the rankings with Baseball America, with MLB Pipeline, I mean, those guys are good. They get their research. It's way more advanced than it was back in the early 2000s in terms of the fan bases all over knowing what they have in terms of talent. I mean, nobody sneaks up on you anymore as like guys. When I was with the Expos, guys would sort of work their way quickly through the minor league system, like Andre Dawson, for example. Nobody heard of him until he got to the big leagues because the information wasn't out there as much. But, just looking at these guys, are all in the 20 to 23-year-old bracket, which is great to fill the farm system. And as you said, at 2023, you're not really sure what you have. They might develop very quickly in certain areas that accelerate their timeline to get to the major leagues. And Cutter Coffee is one of those guys, 20-year-old infielder who was a third-round draft pick by the Red Sox. He's got a chance.
What happened with Nate Pearson? There were injuries, some of them freakish. There was the bout of mono, Griff. There were physical challenges along the way. And look, you and I have talked about him at times this year, and I will raise my hand. Sometimes I can get sarcastic and a little facetious, and I like to laugh about that Sportsnet feature that they did on him a year or two ago. Will Nate Pearson throw 110, 110 miles per hour? Well, it turns out he didn't throw 110 big league innings for the Toronto Blue Jays. He came in at just under 100. So, didn't even make 110 career innings with the Blue Jays. And was considered a guy who could be, we knew he was a flamethrower. Could the arm hold up so that he could be a front end of the rotation guy? The injuries, the mono, the ineffectiveness, the lack of consistent work due to injuries and illness. Okay, now he's a reliever. and he couldn't even, you saw flashes, but he couldn't even consistently produce as a 3 or maybe even at times 6 out guy.
Yeah.
It's just, and I
Yeah.
don't, Griff, you know him. So the ignoramus in me sort of forms this opinion that his focus, and I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying an outsider's point of view, rightly or wrongly, would be that he was focused more on trying to throw the goddamn baseball as hard as he could than actually developing as a pitcher.
Yeah, I remember. I remember researching in the first decade of this century, so 2000 to 2010. You would be looking in Baseball Reference or somewhere that listed the velocities. You would be looking for guys that were listed as throwing 100 plus or touching 100. And it was so rare. You could look through 6 organizations, and they listed them as a separate category in Baseball Reference. 100 mile an hour. And most organizations, it was blank, blank, blank. And so there was only 5 or 6 guys that threw 100 in baseball. And that was so rare at that point. And I think that at the back end of that was Nate Pearson coming up and throwing 100 and being so phenomenally exceptional. And then he got hurt, and then he got hit in the elbow, and then he got mono, and so by the time he came back to health, there was a stampede behind him of 100-mile-an-hour throwers. And he turned around and looked, and he went, "Oh my God, I got to do something different because these guys are behind me." And then like you see guys come out of the bullpen for other teams, other major league teams, and they just throw gas. They throw 100, 101. They don't worry about the secondary pitches. Nate was always trying to figure out how he could work his slider in there and make his fastball seem like it was 108 by throwing too many sliders. And so that was his goal. And every time he made that adjustment, especially when he went to the bullpen, every time he made the adjustment and got ahead of the hitters, video killed the radio star. And he came up and they would catch him, and then he would have to make an adjustment again. He would go back to primary fastball and mix in the sliders. And since his command was never as good as it should have been, they were always catching up with his adjustments. And God bless him, maybe the change of scenery when he gets to Chicago, when he gets to Wrigley, will help. Maybe they'll give him a chance to become a Jordan Hicks type starter out of the bullpen and go back to what his original dream was. But it wasn't working here. He likely needed to go somewhere else, but it was surprising nonetheless because he had 2 years of control left on his contract. So, but I think it was just in his mind, and he was stampeded by others throwing harder and more consistent and with better command.
Yeah, my first reaction was, what are the Cubs doing? But, you know, guys who have pedigree or who are drafted high and have a high ceiling, there's always going to be a team out there that says, we get our hands on him.
Yeah.
We can make him realize his potential. And maybe, so this is probably a flyer from the Cubs perspective. They've been weird at the break, Griff. They got Paredes out of Tampa Bay, but there's control left there. So I guess it makes more sense. But like, there's 6 or 7 games under 500. It's like,
Yeah.
are they getting Pearson to help in an attempt to get into the wild card race now, or is this a longer-term play?
If Pearson only had the remaining 2024 season of control, then I would say yes. But I think no. I mean, there's an organization that got something out of Julian Merriweather that, for a while anyway. And when Stroh went there, it was a change of scenery from where he was. And, but I think the carrot on a stick with most organizations is, hey, if we get our hands on this guy, our coach, whoever it is, hitting coach, pitching coach, can fix it. And it's easy to be fooled into saying, hey, we can fix this guy when he throws 99 and touches 100 and has a slider that when he locates it is devastating. but he just not consistent. And when the Blue Jays had a game plan where they have a starter going 6 innings and then they need 3 pitchers to finish a game, 1 inning apiece. The way it stood now, one of those 3 pitchers was always going to mess up. And that's where you get in a situation where you need a perfect chain. And when there's a weak link in the bullpen coming out, all of a sudden the whole game plan goes down the drain. And that's what was happening with the inconsistency of guys like Zach Pop and Nate Pearson and Trevor Richards lately. Is like you can have a great game plan, but in the 8th inning, if a guy can't get anybody out, there goes the plan down the drain, and you lose the game, and your manager looks like a donkey, and your pitching coach should be fired, according to social media. So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I just think it's just, I mean, it's a weird thing to say now, Griff, because, we're, in my opinion, properly critical when it's time. But now that there's a finality to some of these guys' situations with the franchise, it's a miss. It's sad. It's unfortunate. It's a part of the reason, the Pearson situation, why the team is in the position it's in. And you want to have homegrown players regardless. And you talk often, and I heard you repeat it to Perk last week about wanting to build a team around 1 or 2 homegrown stars who you lock in long term. They set your culture. They come up through the organization, etc. I think we did an episode this time last year where I asked the question, are the Toronto Blue Jays of today, which would have been a year ago, the Chicago Cubs of the middle of last decade, but without the World Series ring? Because most of the pitching is mercenary, and you can spend big dollars and you can go get those guys, but those guys are older because it takes them 6 years of service time to hit big league free agency. So you're getting them around 29 or 30 typically. And then once they get into their mid-30s, they're not as effective anymore. Just not having Pearson, right?
Yeah.
Not just an example of a guy they just could not, for whatever reason, develop.
Well, pitching is mercenary, but pitching also has become very fragile. There's 53 guys on ILs, major league ILs, that are out for the rest of the year. 53 pitchers, just pitchers. And that is ridiculous. And that comes from max effort, max velocity, as long as you can go, and then we'll bring in somebody who throws 95 to 100 to pick you up in the 6th or the 7th. And that's the way you go. And you look at the number of injuries and the Tommy Johns, and you got the 2 top prospects, Ricky Tiedemann out. Does that mean he's out forever? No, it means he's out for the rest of this year and all of next year. So like in 2026, he starts again. He's still the same Ricky Tiedemann, might even have a stronger arm at that point, just not stronger in velocity, stronger, more durable. So it sets the start of his career back. But there's so many of those guys that I think that when you're building an organization for the future and you're building from within, what my point was that you should do it around, and at one point earlier in the season, we're at episode 30. It's probably episode 15. We're talking about Bo and Vlad, and I thought that both Bo and Vlad should be signed long-term because those are 2 cornerstones in most organizations that move forward. You bring veterans in and they see these cornerstone guys and they already know how to play and they're leaders in that clubhouse. So it's easier to fit in if you're coming from the outside. But for those who suggest that Vlad should be traded, shake yourself. This guy's 25 years old. So you trade for 3 younger guys, maybe a pitcher who's ready for the big leagues right now. Like, for them to even reach the level that Vlad is at 25 years old is outrageous. It's not going to happen. This guy's now got his batting average up over 300. As we predicted on Exit Philosophy 10 episodes ago, he's going to be a 30 home run guy this year.
Well, you did.
Well, I was including you just just in
I
case
was
was
I
still
didn't say he
affecting your
would.
brain.
I didn't say he wouldn't. I just said he was on pace to hit about 15 at the time, and you're
Yeah.
like, nah, he'll hit 30. So you can take the credit for that.
But the point is that if you look, and I know it's ridiculous to make this comparison, but if you look at Aaron Judge at 25 and Vlad Guerrero at 25, Vlad has twice as many home runs, twice as many RBIs. And granted, he's not going to be Aaron Judge moving forward, but he's already got a head start in terms of career numbers that should make him much more highly respected as a Toronto Blue Jay and as a cornerstone of any future effort to get back into playoff contention.
Well, that's such a strange conversation, Griff, the whole Vlad thing, because it feels like you go back and forth depending on the way the wind blows. Because I mean, he was hitting the crap out of the baseball, but he wasn't getting any loft and wasn't hitting any home runs earlier in the season. It was like, so what do you do with this guy? And the way that he's played since about the start of June onward, if this continues to the end of the season, you're then going to go into the offseason and say, man, you can't let this get to spring training with this guy as lame duck. Now I come back around and say you've got to try to do the long-term deal. And
yeah, I still agree with that. But as we've spoken about before, what does a long-term deal look like? You can't be the Blue Jays have never been a team to set the bar. The Blue Jays have been a team to try and jump over the bar or just understand where the bar is and then negotiate below that. But like you go from the Shohei Ohtani contract, then you go to February when teams were signing players for 3 years with opt-outs after year 1, 2. So where does Vlad fit in? We don't know until somebody sets that bar because the Blue Jays don't like to set the bar.
Okay, so then here's a question. And the answer really just matters what Vlad and his representatives think. What does Vlad and his people believe he is relative to Juan Soto? Because Juan Soto is the premier free agent on the market this winter.
And what about Pete Alonso? He doesn't compare himself to Pete Alonso?
God, I want to believe he's better than Pete Alonso, Griff. I know Alonso.
Yeah, I would say he's not better than Juan Soto.
No, he's not.
Yeah.
But I'm asking what he believes.
Yeah.
And it may behoove him, and it may take till March because bloody Boris, which is a whole other topic.
Yeah, he might have to rethink his strategies
but
after the debacle of last year.
Yeah,
he might be one of the first guys out of the box making deals.
You never know. So, but if Soto gets $550 million, is Vlad going to say, I want 450 over 12 or 450 over 10, like something asinine, and then it's going to be, and asinine isn't necessarily a negative thing. It's just going to, holy crap, sort of, the reaction. But will the organization be willing to do it?
If you're 2/3 as good an actor as Leo DiCaprio, do you think you deserve 2/3 as much money as he gets? He's a headliner.
Sure.
No, you don't. There's only one level of star attractions that sort of.
So you're saying in his mind he would look at what Soto gets and says that's my number?
Yeah.
Okay, well I think
the player himself never really sets the number. It's like how many. It's market. It's the open market.
Then he would. So then that tells me he's walking to free agency because I just don't see. I don't see them ponying up a $500 million.
You don't think players and their reps can possibly see the reality of where this is all going? There's too much ego involved, and I want to be like that guy. There's too much of that going on.
What do you?
I'm saying that
I'm
saying that if the Blue Jays made a solid 8 to 10 year offer, he's 25 years old. That's reasonable. 8 to 10 year offer at 25 a year. He shouldn't consider that.
At 25, he's a first baseman, 25 million a year. Jeez,
I mean,
I don't. I think
okay.
that number's. I think that
All
number's
right.
got to
So,
start with. I think that number's got to start with a 3 on an
well,
annual basis,
yeah.
Griff. At
Well,
this point, 25.
well,
The
that's why they'll
AAV.
wait till somebody sets the market.
Yeah,
Soto.
yeah. It's just, I.
But he's worth more to the Blue Jays than he is to 29 other teams because of his track record and his life history in this organization. And it
Well,
might count for something with him. He might, you know, like what a home team discount when you're up in the 25 to 35 million dollar range sounds ridiculous. A home team discount at 25 million dollars. But there's a little wiggle room up there in terms of
yeah, but I just also think, you know what, the price of
how
owning
many
a
how
base.
many teams have the ability to spend that money that don't have a first baseman who they
Well,
can.
but Vladdy's also going to look at it and say, you guys were apparently willing to break the company's bank to go get Otani. I want a good chunk of that
Yeah,
at
but
the.
no, nobody's standing in Tokyo Times Square at 4 a.m. to see Vladdy hit.
No, that's true. Um, but but my point is that owning a baseball team from a player payroll point of view is an uh expensive deal at this particular point in time, and you need to field a good team, as you say, Griff, to fill the swanky seats. That the Who's the guy who speaks? Remind me of his name. The guy who speaks to the business component, only makes himself available to talk business, not baseball.
The A&W
Um,
guy.
no, not the A&W guy, although he might serve as a stand-in. Um,
So
I can't
Ross
remember. I can't remember his name right now, but he hasn't exactly
or
waltzed
Mark
out to talk.
Shapiro.
Oh yeah, he hasn't exactly waltzed out to talk about how
How the
season ticket
rollout in July is gone and
season
the
ticket renewals
renewal
have
deadline.
gone, and the luxury suites and all the business
Yeah.
things that he's
But
supposed to make himself.
I must say that the crowds that are still going to the games, and the Jays are wheeling out a new promotion almost every day, a new giveaway, a new, the run the bases, Junior Jays. So it's keeping the attendance up, and they swept the Texas Rangers. I'm surprised and happy in a way that there's that many people still going to the games because it means that we, with exit philosophy, might have an audience that stays with us till the end of the season.
Right. I'm Yes.
Selfishly, I'm looking at the crowds and going, oh, there's still a lot of interest.
Right, but also selfishly, as somebody who wants to watch entertaining and winning baseball,
Yes.
40,000 people in the seats more nights than not is not necessarily the message you want to be sending to an uninspired front office. I'm not saying they're not trying to win. I'm just saying there are ways to apply pressure.
Yeah.
And
And we've discussed it before, but I think a lot of the pressure that ownership in this Blue Jays team will feel will come from television ratings in August and September. And I know the Olympics are on now, and that break dancing will probably take a large chunk of audience away from the Blue Jays. But I'm being facetious, sorry. But they will react when the TV ratings go down, and they're inevitable with a team that could win 70 to 75 games this year quite easily.
Kikuchi will be on the move, and we apologize again. We are recording over the lunch hour on Monday, July the 29th. We will go live on youtube.com/@exitphilosophy Tuesday night, July the 30th at 8 o'clock Eastern time. I'm going to repeat that more for me than for anybody else. That's 9 o'clock Atlantic time. I can't be an hour early. 5 o'clock Pacific time. The Jays will be in the middle of a game against the Baltimore Orioles, but we can do two things at once, and our focus will be on the trade deadline and wrapping all of that up. And the focus will be on the Blue Jays, but generally on big league baseball.
Yeah, the deadline will have been at six o'clock Eastern time.
Right.
Gives, even with late announced trades, we should have them all.
We feel
for
safe.
our
So Kikuchi's going to move. And what's interesting now, Griff, is that they're like Kikuchi's kind of this certainty, but where he slots in terms of priority isn't so clear, because are the Giants going to trade Blake Snell? And can they, given that Snell has a $30 million player option for next year? So the risk of the acquiring team is that Snell, if he hadn't pitched much this year, right? He's come off the injured list.
He struck out 15 yesterday.
He's starting to throw better.
Yeah,
he's had a really good month. So if that continues to the end of the year and maybe he pitches for a playoff team, then he's walking into a big contract if he can rein his agent in.
Right.
But if he doesn't, or then it's kind of in its own way a lost season, and he would just lock in at the $30 million player option for next year with whatever team he's on. So there are mitigating circumstances around Snell for an acquiring team. Garrett Crochet of the Chicago White Sox.
That's the interesting one.
Is 2 years to free agency, and he's been quoted as saying, yeah, you can trade for me, but if we don't do a contract extension, I'm not going to pitch in the playoffs. So picture this, Griff. Garrett Crochet, this is not the National Football League where contracts are not guaranteed. This is not the NBA where players raise their hands and force trades. This is Major League Baseball, where Garrett Crochet has 2 years of control, team control remaining before he's a free agent. So the team that the team that acquires him has him, whether he likes it or not, which means he's going to have a lot of the same teammates next March in spring training that he's threatening to bail on in October if he doesn't get a deal that's more to his liking as opposed to arbitration numbers for the 2025 and 2026 seasons. This strikes me as a lot of sort of NFL and NBA posturing in a league that doesn't have the player doesn't have the leverage to posture like this. It's like, dude, screw off.
But the teams that were interested or are interested in Garrett Crochet, there's 29 other teams saying, don't do it. Don't back down. Don't make an extension, because all of a sudden the power goes to the players and the players union. If they can leverage that demand and make it work, you're screwing the entire industry, is the way they're looking at it. And I mean, your point is brilliant about being in the clubhouse. And imagine you're going down the stretch and you got to clinch a division, and Crochet's on the mound, and you clinch the division and you're celebrating, but he's not pitching in the postseason because he didn't get his extension. The next March, the next spring training, the next year would be untenable. And I could see a player telling his representation, his agent, just back off. I'm going to pitch, that's
like the only way around it, Griff, like we're talking as if this is going to play out this way. We're just hypothesizing because it's interesting. But the only way is if you brought all your teammates around you and said, look, I have decided, rightly or wrongly, that I am standing at the vanguard, and I am the forebearer of a new movement that is going to force earlier free agency in the next collective bargaining agreement. And this is one of the ways we're going to chip at the wall and eventually bring it down. And
the problem is that 11 of the 13 teammates to whom he's speaking have no interest in hearing that, because they're not in the same category. They're just trying to make a living. They're trying to go to the postseason. They're trying to win a ring. And
or they've already
saying, I'm doing it for you. I'm doing it for you. That's bullshit.
Well, I'm coming up with possibilities.
Yeah.
Well, it's total.
I'm not mad at you.
Yeah, no, but I'm just saying, I'm like, this is wild talk.
Yeah.
I'm not going to pitch for you in October if you don't give me a contract extension. Okay.
And it's his first year. I mean, it's his first year in the rotation after parts of 3 seasons being a strong arm, left-handed bullpen lefty
Right.
specialist, you know?
Right.
Like he got the break from the White Sox, and now he's standing in the way of his next 2 seasons and possibly his career by trying to a power play that's not going to work.
Well, maybe Griff, and we don't know this, but maybe pitching for a team that's won 25 of its first 105 or 6 games is his dream. Maybe he doesn't want to leave the south side of Chicago. Guaranteed loss field. You know?
I mean, I would imagine that even getting there, because getting there as a media member to that ballpark, especially getting away from that ballpark after a night game, is just a nightmare. And so like the whole
How did you do that, by the way?
Took the subway, took the
Yeah, because I would always walk up the street to the subway, the L train.
Yeah. That was the only way you could. I tried, this is before Ubers. I was trying to get cabs to come out there. They would say we'll be there, and you'd wait an hour, and they wouldn't show up. They wouldn't come to that neighborhood, you know?
Right. But I know we're digressing, but quickly. I never felt unsafe. Now, I never walked alone at night, but I never felt unsafe getting it's probably 2 or 3 blocks from the ballpark up to the L train station. I never felt unsafe like I did
Yeah.
in the Oakland walks.
Yeah, no, the Oakland we've talked about with Oakland, but
the old stories, Griff,
the
old stories were that the South Side was like a hellscape. Like you wouldn't do that in the 90s the way we did it in the 2010s.
Yeah. But it was such a huge difference because for 20 years or 15 years traveling with the Expos, you go to Wrigley. It's a same city, but a completely different experience. It's a lovely experience. If you wanted to, after a game, just go to one of those corner bars around Wrigley, or if you go back to the hotel, you drop your stuff and you go to Division and Rush, and you just stay with friends, and everyone seemed to be your friend, even if you didn't know them before. And at 4 a.m, you wander back to the hotel.
Yeah.
On your own, you know? Well,
yeah.
Hopefully you have a friend, but I'd like to ask a friend.
like to call a friend.
Yeah,
50-50.
But yeah, same city, different experience, and even the White Sox was not the same experience as Oakland, which we've discussed it to great extent.
Yeah, but back to my point about where Kikuchi slots in this upper tier of available pitchers now. And like I wonder about the Texas Rangers, and they flipped Lorenzen.
Yeah, they got guys coming back from
the Royals,
disabled or IL.
Yeah, so they get swept in Toronto. But they get swept in Toronto. That crushes them, Griff. I mean,
well, they had a guy who didn't throw a pitch, starting pitcher. So, and then Lorenzen, in his own start, only lasted 2/3 of an inning. So, yeah, I mean, that was an aberration. And you remember last season, they came in and swept 4 from the Blue Jays. That sort of propelled them to where they won the World Series. And the Blue Jays reacted by winning 12 of 18 down the stretch and making it to the postseason. So if a one series does not determine, even at this time of year, doesn't determine where you're headed, or doesn't, it's not a portent of things to come.
Right, but they were closing in on 500, and they've now set themselves back further.
Yeah,
I mean, it would not an ideal, just given where they were, not an ideal result. But my point being with Kikuchi is, where does he slot now? Because not a lot of complication here. He's a free agent at the end of the season,
and he's got $4.5 million remaining on his contract for you to be responsible for.
He's a guy you can trust 2 turns through the rotation.
So he's a 3rd or 4th starter for a contending or a championship. He's a 3rd or 4th starter, which means that he has a role as a starter in the postseason. Yep. You only need 3 starters in the first round if you're a wild card, but you need 4 the rest of the way. And so he's one of those guys. And if he's not in your rotation, he's proved that he can come out of the bullpen and be effective for 2, 3, 4 innings as a reliever. Yeah. So he's definitely got a significant role, and I think it puts him ahead of Crochet, and it puts him, because Crochet, his first year in a rotation, who knows what his best before pitch count or innings count is, you know? Like, he hasn't thrown as many innings as he's going to throw this year, and Kikuchi has. So I would value, and then the other situation you talk about, Blake Snell, I mean, you're talking a different universe in terms of dollars and expectations of the player himself. And it's funny that John Schneider talked about his conversation with Kikuchi and sort of smiled about the possibility of doing an Aroldis Chapman, and as a free agent, courting him to come back for his final 3-year contract, because he's at 34. He's only got 1 contract left, probably 3 years. But it'd be funny to see if the Jays do get involved in that.
The J-Hap thing, in a way. Kind of different, but similar. Yeah. Or Aroldis with the Yankees.
Right. That was the one. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you do a lot worse than Yusei Kikuchi at the back end of your rotation as your 4th or 5th.
Yeah. And could they do that with Danny Jansen too? I mean, because we've already seen what happens when Alejandro Kirk has to catch every day. And granted, that was coming out of spring training, so he may have been a different mindset, body set, but it didn't work when you had to rely on him, especially how it wore him down offensively. And we're not sure how it wore him down behind the plate in terms of sliding over to block pitches on a 3rd straight game that he was catching, that sort of thing. Because I'm not body shaming him, but he doesn't have a typical Major League 2024 body.
I think I would probably be somebody, generally speaking, I just, like I said, I don't know what the word means, and I just sort of laugh it off, but would be accused of being woke. I don't think you need to qualify a comment about Alejandro Kirk in terms of saying I'm not body shaming a guy. He is a professional athlete. These guys are professional athletes, and there's an expectation there. Now, if it works for the team and it works for him, have at it. But look, I get it, Griff, and Gabby Moreno's in Arizona, and Danny Jansen's in Boston, and Brian Serven is now the backup. So Kirk's going to play 5 or 6 times a week. I would imagine Serven will play day game after night game, or night game before day game, depending on whatever the matchup is. And, Reese McGuire got DFA'd by the Red Sox.
He's always out there.
He's available.
Yeah. Oh, and defensively, Reese McGuire, and he hits left-handed, and he's been here before. But I just think that the way that, I don't think that'll happen. I just don't.
I just think that the way that is the perfect description.
Yeah.
And Griff, I only brought his name up to jerk your chain. That's all I was doing. I wasn't being totally serious about it. But I mean, they do need a guy, and maybe Serven's it, but we're kind of getting deep into the weeds here.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a short learning period to learn a new staff, and Serven of all the equal talent levels in the organization right now. I like Phil Clark. There's a couple other guys, but he has the most built-in knowledge of this pitching staff of any of them, because he's been at Buffalo, and we're going to see more Buffalo pitchers coming up after Kikuchi goes or whatever. So he'd be the logical one. it doesn't mean that Kirk is not going to be overworked. The only ones he'll probably miss will be day games after night games or the night game before day game. He won't catch both ends of the doubleheader
No.
as we speak on Monday, but they'll ride him hard the rest of the way until they figure something out and bring in at least an average offensive player to go with him.
All right, so to put a wrap on this, lunch hour-ish now on Monday, July the 29th. So this is our official episode for the week. But Griff and I will go live on youtube.com/@exitphilosophy at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, Tuesday, July 30th. So that, as we sit here now, would be tomorrow night. The Jays will be in Baltimore playing the Orioles. We won't be focusing on that game. Obviously, we'll be doing a wrap of the Jays trade deadline. We expect more moves to be made. Yusei Kikuchi at the top of the list, so there will be more to talk about. We will treat it like a podcast episode, but because we're live on YouTube, we will invite you into the comments section. And, maybe you've got the game on TV and you're on your laptop and you're with us on YouTube or however you like to do it. But we'll invite your comments and look forward to that. GriffsThePitch.com is where you get the entirety of Griff's work, his multiple weekly columns, his weekly power rankings, his conversations with current and former Blue Jays and former Montreal Expos. Those are all archived and well worth listening to. And the Exit Philosophy podcast is also at GriffsThePitch.com. So head on over there and throw him a subscription.
Thanks, Scotty, and thanks everyone for listening. And once again, thanks to Dave Perkins for filling in last week. We'll talk to you tomorrow.